3 flags, 3 agendas, 1 moon. By 2030, humans will have permanent boots on the lunar surface. That part's basically guaranteed at this point. The question, the one keeping defense analysts, aerospace executives, and foreign policy experts up at night, is whose boots those will be. Because here's what nobody's putting in the headline. The moon is no longer a destination. It's a battleground, and the 3 players competing for it, China's government machine, NASA's political beast, and Elon Musk's private empire, are playing 3 completely different games with 3 completely different rulebooks. One of them is winning, one is stumbling, and one might just blow past everybody, while the other 2 are still arguing over funding. Which is which? That's where it gets interesting. Chapter 1. The scoreboard right now, and it's not what you think. Alright, let's just rip the band-aid off. If you walked into a room of serious space policy analysts today and asked them who's actually ahead in the moon race, a good chunk of them would quietly say China. Not because they want to, not because they're being dramatic, but because the numbers don't lie. Since 2019, China has landed on the far side of the moon, something nobody else has ever done. They've returned lunar soil samples, first time in 44 years. They've mapped water ice deposits near the lunar South Pole with precision that has American scientists genuinely impressed. And right now, while you're watching this, they are actively building hardware for a permanent lunar research station with a target date of 2035, with a crewed mission before 2030. And the kicker? Their entire lunar program costs roughly 1/10 of what America spends on its equivalent efforts. 1/10. Either they've figured something out, or we're doing something seriously wrong. Probably both. Now here's where it gets geopolitically spicy. China isn't going to the moon alone. They've assembled what they're calling the International Lunar Research Station Coalition. Russia's in, Pakistan's in, Venezuela, South Africa, Belarus, the UAE, all signed on. They're building an alliance around a moon base the same way America built alliances around NATO, and the positioning they've chosen? The lunar South Pole. Specifically, an area called the Shackleton Crater and the surrounding terrain. Why does that matter? Because that's where the water ice is. That's where the permanently shadowed regions sit. That's the most strategically valuable real estate on the entire moon. They haven't claimed it legally, no country can under the Outer Space Treaty. But they're racing to get there first and build first, because in space, just like in real estate, possession is 9/10 of the law. America is watching this happen in real time, and the response has been complicated. Chapter 2. NASA's problem. Here's a sentence that should make every American taxpayer furious. NASA has been trying to land on the moon since 2019. Their current target is 2026. That's 7 years. For context, the entire original Apollo program, from Kennedy's speech to Neil Armstrong's boot print, took 8 years and put 12 men on the moon. So what's taking so long? 2 words: Congress and bureaucracy. The Space Launch System, NASA's big moon rocket, has been in development since 2011. It's cost $27 billion so far. That's billion with a B. It's finally flying, but here's the embarrassing part. It uses Space Shuttle main engines. Engines designed in the 1970s, 50-year-old technology, on a rocket we waited 13 years to build, costing more per launch than some countries' entire annual GDP. Every time a new administration comes in, priorities shift. George W. Bush wanted the moon. Obama canceled that, wanted Mars. Trump brought back the moon. Biden kept the moon, but changed the timeline and emphasis. Every transition means new leadership, new priorities, new committees, new reviews. NASA doesn't just fight gravity, it fights politics on a daily basis. And then there's the Artemis program itself. It's not just a NASA project, it's a congressional jobs program in a tuxedo. The SLS rocket has components built in 44 different states. That's not an accident, that's intentional. Because if 44 states have a piece of the contract, 88 senators have a reason to protect the budget. It's smart politics, it's terrible engineering. Meanwhile, Artemis 1, the first uncrewed test flight, finally launched in late 2022. Beautiful launch. Incredible achievement in many ways, but it was 2 years behind schedule and nearly $1 billion over budget. And that was just the uncrewed test. Artemis 2, the crewed flyby without landing, is now targeting late 2025 or 2026. The actual lunar landing? Currently looking at 2026 at the earliest, and almost nobody in the industry believes that timeline holds. And here's what's lurking underneath all of this. NASA knows their own rocket isn't the long-term answer. They know SLS is too expensive, too slow, too old, which is why they've done something unprecedented. They've handed the actual moon landing to SpaceX. That's right, America's return to the moon doesn't depend on NASA's rocket. It depends on Elon Musk. And that raises a whole new set of questions.
Chapter 3. SpaceX, the wild card that changes every calculation.
Let's talk about Starship, because if Starship works, and that's a big if that's getting smaller every month, it doesn't just change the moon race, it ends it before anyone else can even show up. For context, Starship is designed to carry 100 metric tons to orbit. The entire Apollo program, every single moon mission combined, carried about 140 metric tons to the lunar surface over 6 missions. Starship could theoretically match that in 2 flights. It's designed to be fully and rapidly reusable. Both the booster and the upper stage land and fly again. SpaceX says the long-term goal is a launch cost under $10 million. NASA's SLS costs $4.1 billion per launch. Starship versus SLS is like comparing a Boeing 737 to a horse-drawn carriage in terms of cost, reusability, and eventual throughput. SpaceX has already conducted multiple Starship test flights. Early ones exploded spectacularly, publicly, and in ways that would have ended any government program instantly. But SpaceX treated those as data points, not disasters. They iterated, they fixed, they flew again. That's a fundamentally different philosophy from NASA's failure is not an option culture. And here's the thing about SpaceX that people miss. They're not racing to plant a flag, they're racing to build infrastructure. Musk has said publicly many times that the moon is not the goal. Mars is the goal. The moon is a pit stop, a place to test Starship in deep space conditions, maybe establish a fuel depot, and then push on to Mars. That mindset means SpaceX might actually build lunar infrastructure faster than anyone else, not because they care most about the moon, but because it's on the way to where they actually want to go. NASA has officially selected Starship as the human landing system for Artemis, which means for the first time in history, American astronauts will land on the moon in a privately owned spacecraft, not a government vehicle, a SpaceX vehicle. The implications of that are enormous. If SpaceX lands first, they're not just a contractor, they're a presence. They'll know the terrain, the systems, the operations. They'll have the experience. And Musk has made no secret that SpaceX will be doing its own lunar missions beyond NASA contracts. Which brings up the question nobody in Washington wants to ask out loud. What happens when SpaceX's interests and NASA's interests diverge? What happens when Musk decides he wants to do something on the moon that the US government doesn't approve of? What happens when America's moon presence is run by a private company that answers to shareholders and a CEO with a track record of doing exactly what he wants? We're about to find out.
Chapter 4. The chess match.
Let's zoom out and look at the actual stakes, because this goes way beyond national pride and bragging rights. The lunar South Pole has an estimated 600 billion kilograms of water ice. At current launch costs, that water, if converted to rocket fuel, is worth trillions of dollars. But more than the dollar value, it represents the ability to operate in space sustainably. Whoever controls reliable access to lunar water controls the economics of space exploration for the next century. Think of it like this. In the 1800s, whoever controlled the railroad routes controlled commerce across America. In the 1900s, whoever controlled oil supply routes controlled global power. The moon's water ice is the strategic choke point of the 21st century space economy. Right now, there are no rules governing who can mine what, where. The Outer Space Treaty says no country can claim the moon, but American law, specifically the Commercial Space Launch Competitiveness Act of 2015, says American companies can own and sell resources they extract from space. China has similar domestic legislation. So you've got American companies and Chinese state enterprises both operating under laws that say they can take resources in a place where no international body has jurisdiction, racing to the same patch of craters at the lunar South Pole. That's not a recipe for peaceful coexistence. That's a recipe for the most expensive territorial dispute in human history, one that could unfold in slow motion over the next decade. The US has tried to get ahead of this with the Artemis Accords, a set of principles for responsible behavior in space that now has over 30 signatory nations. It covers everything from transparency to debris mitigation to the concept of safety zones around lunar operations. But notice who hasn't signed: China, Russia, the two countries building a competing moon base. So you've got two coalitions, two sets of rules, two visions for how the moon gets used, and they're headed toward the same location. The Trump administration's reemergence has added yet another layer to this. With an aggressive America First posture on space, there's increasing pressure to move faster, spend more, and treat the moon race explicitly as a national security competition rather than a scientific endeavor. Space Force is being elevated. Commercial partnerships are being accelerated. The rhetoric has shifted from sustainable exploration to strategic dominance, which is exactly the kind of language that historically precedes conflict.
Last chapter. So, who wins?
Here's the uncomfortable truth that nobody in any of these three camps wants to admit. The moon is big enough and complex enough that no single entity is going to control it the way a country controls territory on Earth. But the decisions being made right now, who lands where, who mines what, who sets up infrastructure first, will create facts on the ground that are almost impossible to undo. In 2030, we'll probably have American boots on the moon, Chinese robots at the South Pole, and SpaceX hardware everywhere in between. Whether those presences coexist, compete, or collide depends on decisions being made in Washington, Beijing, and Hawthorne, California right now. The moon race of the 1960s was a sprint with a clear finish line. This one is a marathon with no finish line, no referee, and stakes that are hard to even comprehend. China's betting on discipline, NASA's betting on alliances, SpaceX is betting on Elon Musk, and the rest of the world is just watching to see who blinks first. One thing's for certain, by 2030, the moon won't be the quiet, peaceful, empty place we've always looked up at. It'll be the most contested piece of real estate in human history, and what happens there will shape the next 100 years of life here on Earth. Thank you for watching.